Hey everyone. I heard this is an overpowering microphone. How is this distance? Okay. Thank you so much for being here, and Publication Studio, thank you so much for having me. And thank you also to Howard and Matt for reading. I'm excited to hear you read. I'm reading a really, really super new story, like a story that I just finished revising a couple of hours ago, which is unusual for me to do, but I just figured you guys would be forgiving. Will you? Okay. So I'm gonna read it. It's called Sailboat. Arthur hadn't gone far, just 2 hours north to the small city where the college was. He thought of it sometimes as running away, though he called or emailed his parents every week, and he had told them he was leaving and where he was going, and that he might enroll in the college at some point. Arthur was in his new kitchen eating pasta with butter for dinner. His roommate Dusty came in. Dusty went to the college part-time. "Hey bro," Dusty said, "Gamelan?" "Definitely," Arthur said. The butter was making it difficult to get a purchase with his fork. Dusty said he was leaving in 5 minutes. Arthur said he'd be ready and kept chasing the slippery noodles around the bowl. Dusty had round blue eyes like plates of milk left out for cats, and he always waited quietly for Arthur to finish whatever he was doing. It was fall and it was dusk. Dusty and Arthur walked on paths past dorms and other buildings, and Dusty said "hey bro" to people he knew. Bro, in the way Dusty said it, sounded lighter than Arthur had usually heard people saying it. It had more breath in it. Arthur walked and let his arms hang loose at his sides. He knew that someone leaving home for the first time might look up at the purple sky that domed above and behind the college buildings and marvel that it was the same sky he'd left behind, but to him, this was a new sky. He felt as if he were covered in feathers, as if the air were his sweater, as if no one before him had ever had the idea, at 17, to run away from home to a city where the college gamelan ensemble performed free for the community once every 2 months. The free concerts were something Arthur had offered to his parents when he tried to explain why he was leaving. He played them a recording, but, he told them, a recording didn't really do it justice. His mother said it sounded like nice music to take a nap to. His father said it sounded repetitive. He said, "I prefer music that takes you by surprise, wham bam." Arthur said, "Like what? What music do you listen to that goes wham bam?" His father said, "With the Beatles, you never know what's coming around the next corner." Arthur couldn't argue with that. "But," he said, "think about how many times you've heard every Beatles song. By this point, you know exactly what's going to come around every corner. With gamelan music, you don't expect change, so you're more affected by the smaller changes." Arthur's father, who liked to say that he welcomed opportunities to be proven wrong, turned up the volume on the gamelan recording too loud and asked Arthur to point out 1 or 2 of the smaller changes. The ensemble began their performance, and Arthur leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He was trying to get the courage together to ask the director of the ensemble if he could join, even though he wasn't enrolled at the college. He had heard that there was a whole second tier of players who were sort of apprentices. Arthur wondered if apprentices got to choose which of the gamelan instruments they played, or if they were assigned, or if they got to try out a number of instruments until they found the best fit. Arthur was most interested in learning to play the medium-sized brass pots, which were called the bonang barong. Dusty listened to the concert, leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed. Arthur had found out about the room at Dusty's from a friend he knew from high school. The friend had been living with Dusty and had conveniently been planning to move to Chicago as soon as he could find someone to take over his room. Dusty played the saxophone. When he played, he closed his milk plate eyes and played so quietly, on purpose, all breath with a swipe of tone to it. Arthur knew from some friends of Dusty's who were in the gamelan ensemble that the leader of the ensemble only had one name. After the performance, Arthur walked down the steps to the front of the auditorium. "Sumarsam," Arthur said, and introduced himself. Sumarsam was very nice and didn't seem to care that Arthur wasn't enrolled at the college, but he said that all tiers of the ensemble were currently full. Arthur asked if there was a waiting list, and Sumarsam said there was, and told Arthur who he had to call to get on it. Dusty was waiting for Arthur by the front entrance. He said he was going to go over to the practice rooms for a while. He had a locker there where he kept one of his saxophones. Arthur walked with Dusty over to the music building and watched Dusty swipe his card to get inside. Somehow it was still dusk out. Arthur blew a big stream of breath out of his mouth, expecting to see it. Arthur got out his cell phone and used it to call the number Sumarsum had given him. He got the voicemail of the music department secretary and left a message with his name and number, saying he'd like to be added to the waiting list. To be honest, he was disappointed. Gamelon wasn't the only reason he had left home, but it was one of the best reasons. Arthur started walking toward Main Street. He put on his headphones and pressed play on a recording he'd made that afternoon. He had a few old analog synthesizers, a tape machine, and electronic drums set up in his room. He kept a notebook in his pocket where he marked down the passages he liked, and when he got home, he'd edit those parts together. Arthur came to a brick-fronted bar with a rainbow Budweiser sign in the window and small wooden letters above the door that read, "Chances." He took off his headphones. He looked to the left and the right and went in. What didn't Arthur love about the 2 sets of black curtains and the short passageway that separated them, the stand for the bouncer where no bouncer stood, the tiny lights like stars on the ceiling? He ordered a $2 beer and sat, facing out, on a bar stool at the end of the bar closest to the door. It was his 3rd time at Chances, and he told himself that the next time he came, he would sit somewhere farther inside. The bar was dark, but Arthur wouldn't have minded it darker. He wouldn't have minded it just a little bit darker, and the lights on the ceiling could have let off soft drops of light that would float down and land on the wall, on a man, on a drink, on a man, and disappear. You could follow to where the light had been or stay on your bar stool, waiting for the light to fall again. The second curtain opened, and a man Arthur recognized from the Gamelon ensemble came in. The man nodded at Arthur and came over to the bar to get a drink. Arthur wanted to compliment the man on his performance, but the curtain might have been a wall between 2 worlds. The man turned to Arthur and asked him if he studied the Gamelon. "I was at the concert tonight," Arthur said. The man said, "I know." He swept his eyes across Arthur's face and body so quickly Arthur expected to feel a breeze. The man asked if Arthur was new in town, and Arthur said he had been there since August. Arthur couldn't decide if the man was more or less handsome than he had seen from the audience. He was wearing an electric blue silk shirt, which had distinguished him from the other members of the Gamelon ensemble, who wore mostly whites and grays. Arthur liked the man's beard, which cut a line around his jaw slightly thicker than a Sharpie. Arthur meant to lean closer to the man or say something about his beard, but instead he said, "I actually really want to study the Gamelon." He said he had asked Sumarsum if he could join the ensemble. He said, as an apprentice. He said, "I don't go to the college yet." "Oh," the man said. He was already almost walking away. Arthur leaned back against the bar and sipped his second beer. He knew he looked older than 17. He knew he had been one of those babies that people say looks like an old man. From looking in the mirror while shaving in the mornings, he knew that still, his face at rest did not look open and expectant. It looked like a face wrapped around a brain that was thinking through a problem. The problem and the face appeared uncomfortable. Arthur didn't know if it was his face that had caused the man from the Gamelon ensemble to walk away from the bar so abruptly, or if he had simply been eager to meet the friends he'd crossed the bar to join. Lady Gaga came on the jukebox. The man from the Gamelon ensemble jumped up with his friends and started dancing, as did many of the other men in the bar. Arthur was surprised that the man from the Gamelon ensemble liked this kind of music, or liked it enough to dance to it. Another man sat down on the stool next to Arthur's. He had a bald head and a heavy mustache. He said, "Not a dancer?" "I don't know," Arthur said. "Let me guess," said the bald man, "this isn't your type of music." The man was significantly older than Arthur, and he wore a tight black t-shirt and jeans. Arthur tried to do something to his face to make it look more comfortable. The feeling he imagined he should have if the right man sat down next to him would be of something from within him leaping outward, so to speak. He saw the feeling as a rope spontaneously uncoiling from his chest, and the rope would have a loop at the end, and it would land noiselessly around the body of the man or in the man's hand, depending on whether he was catching the man or being caught by him. The man put his hand high up on Arthur's left thigh. Arthur's dick twitched like a stupid, untrained animal. "I can tell," the man said. "You're like me. You love the classics. What's your favorite Beatles song?" Arthur's phone buzzed in his right-hand pocket. "Excuse me," he said, and half stood up to get his phone out. It was a text from Dusty saying he was done practicing, and did Arthur want to meet him for a drink over at Sloane's. Arthur stood up fully and tugged the denim at his crotch away from his body. "I pretty much like all the songs on Revolver," Arthur said, and put some money on the bar and left. It was finally dark out. Sloane's was only a few doors down from Chance's, but Arthur turned right to walk around the block. He put his headphones on, but he didn't press play. Something about his interaction with the bald man had made Arthur feel guilty, and he tried to lose the guilt in the soft October air. Not far outside of town, pumpkins and patches were growing rounder and more orange. His parents had a boat they kept mostly in the driveway, covered in a tarp, and in the fall, orange, red, yellow, and brown leaves would land on the tarp, and shallow pools of rainwater would gather in the creases. Arthur passed the 3-story cement building that held the room where he'd taken and passed his GED last week. When he told his parents, they'd asked him if he was thinking of enrolling in some classes at the college in the winter quarter. Sloane's had a bouncer at the door, and Arthur got out his fake ID, which belonged to the hometown friend whose room he'd moved into. They looked well enough alike. "Hey bro," Dusty said. Arthur ordered a $2 beer. Dusty asked Arthur what he'd been up to. Arthur said he'd just been walking around. "Listening?" Dusty asked. "Yeah," said Arthur, drinking his beer quickly. "Hear anything good?" asked Dusty. There'd been a beat Arthur had come up with earlier that day that he had been excited to listen back to, but he'd gotten to chances before it came up on the tape. How did it go again? Dusty was drinking the dark beer he always drank. The bartender brought over a basket of French fries, and Dusty said Arthur should help himself. Dusty picked up a French fry and dipped it in ketchup, and Arthur noticed that Dusty's fingers were long and moved gracefully. He felt nervous. "Did I tell you I passed my GED?" he said. "You did," Dusty said. "Congrats, bro." Dusty tipped his glass. He said, "How does that feel?" "I don't know," Arthur said. I don't know," Arthur said. The bartender asked if he wanted another beer. He ordered a dark beer. He said, "I guess it feels like a gesture?" Dusty nodded. "I mean, it means more for what it means than what it is." "Right," Dusty said. The dark beer tasted like bitter leaves and metal. Arthur felt embarrassed that he had told Dusty about the GED twice. Lady Gaga came on the jukebox. Dusty said, "The song actually isn't that bad." Dusty was right. He had a sense about things. He didn't have to jump up and start dancing if a song was good, or assume that just because someone hadn't jumped up, that it wasn't their type of music. Arthur was supposed to have felt what? Grateful that some old bald guy put his hand on his thigh? Dusty had started talking about the French fries in Belgium. He was talking about how many of the streets in Belgium were still paved with uneven cobblestones. He said that some of the beers there were very alcoholic, and when people went out drinking, they started with the weakest beers and went from there, and each type of beer had a special glass. He said, "The glass for the strongest beer is also the hardest to hold. It's like this big glass beaker in a wooden stand. You should see everyone trying to get a grip on it." "When did you go to Belgium?" Arthur said. Back at the house, Arthur made pasta with butter, and he and Dusty ate it. "You know what I should do," Arthur said, "is get one of those big bags of spinach at the grocery store. You put the spinach in just after you drain the pasta, and it just cooks right into it." "It wilts," Dusty said. Arthur said, "We could get some garlic, too." He and Dusty had talked about planting a garden in the small raised bed in the side yard. Arthur was now drinking his 5th beer of the night, and though he was back to the same yellow water he paid $2 for at the bar, he felt as if each beer were getting stronger. He poured the beer from its can into his childhood mug with an A on it. He put his thumb and ring finger on the mug's handle, the hardest way he could imagine to get a grip, and tried to pick it up. "I'm in Belgium," Arthur said. "The streets are so old." Theirs was the last house on a dead end, and Arthur had taken to keeping the volume on his electronic drums and synthesizers low to match Dusty's playing. It was 1 a.m., and they played in Arthur's room because that was where the equipment was already set up. Dusty suggested Arthur start out with a beat. Arthur hit around a bit and found the beat he'd been working on earlier. It was a good beat. It sounded like someone falling down a short flight of stairs. Was the person okay? It didn't matter. That was what Arthur liked about playing the electronic drums. It always sounded like something. Dusty played long, floating notes over the beat. They jammed on that for a while, and then Arthur switched to his synthesizer and played a little riff that was something like what he thought the Bonang Barung player had been doing in the gamelan ensemble. Dusty caught on and played some higher notes around it. Arthur stopped playing. "I don't know," he said. Dusty said, "Let's go back to that first one." Arthur went back over to his drums and started up the beat. Dusty closed his eyes and put his long fingers on the saxophone keys. He breathed into the mouthpiece. He moved his fingers slowly on the keys. Arthur felt the notes hover, these long notes that didn't have any rhythm to them, that didn't concern themselves with rhythm, that let Arthur be the one falling down the stairs over and over if he wanted to. Thanks.